the last couple of weeks, news of Russia-Ukraine conflict have surpassed COVID pandemic news. Like some of you, I sort of know the story behind the conflict and the relationship between the two countries, but I truly wanted to understand where the conflict came from. After all, they were both part of USSR for decades, so I did my research and learned the history of the two nations. It came clear to me that recent conflict was rooted so deep, and it is in the making for almost a century, if not more. So let's look at the conflict from the perspective of understanding and learning about the conflict. It is a long history. My original research paper had 10,000 words, and I have to shrink it to under 1500 words to make this video. So it doesn't include all the historical information, but it should cover enough information for you to understand the conflict. To fully appreciate Ukraine-Russian relationship, we need to go all the way back to 9th century. Both Russia and Ukraine claim their heritage from the ancient Rus. However, the extent of the shared commonality is disputed in both sides. Mongols invaded and had the control of the region between 1237 and 40. After the invasion, histories of Russia and the Ukraine diverge. Somewhere between year 1349 and 1430, Russia was able to unite all the Rus northern provinces, expanded into a powerful Russian state. Ukraine came under the domination of a Grand Duchy of Lithuania and then by Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth. This is one of the important period in their history as Ukrainian heritage and the ethnicity started to mix with Polish and Lithuanians. Many Ukrainians, particularly in the eastern region, resisted Polonization, often clashed with Polish nobility and sought union with Russia, as they shared much of their culture, language and religion with Russia. This was formalized in 1654. Ukraine was gradually absorbed into Russian Empire. Russia and Russians considers Ukrainians as ethnically Russians and refer to them as Little Russians. This view is opposed by many Ukrainians. However, during the 19th century, Russian rule strengthened and Russia imposed ban on Ukrainian language in Ukraine part of the world. The relationship between Soviet and Ukraine further deteriorated. After the military aggression in the early 1918, Ukraine declared full independence from Russia. Then in 1921, Russian Red Army conquered 2/3 of Ukraine and established Soviet Union. Western third of Ukraine joined Poland. Once again, Ukraine as a country disappeared off the map. Between 1932 and 1933, Ukraine experienced massive famine called Holodomor famine. It killed up to 7.5 million Ukrainians. Scholars disagree the cause of the famine. However, in 2010, appellate court found Russian and Ukraine Soviet leaders guilty of genocide during the Holodomor famine. In 1939, in the early stages of World War II, Western Ukraine is annexed by Soviet Union under the terms of Nazi-Soviet Pact. Between 1941 and 1944, Nazis occupied Ukraine and Ukraine suffered terrible devastations. Then in 1954, in a surprise move, Soviet government transfers Crimea Peninsula to Ukraine. But you had to remember, at the time, Ukraine was part of USSR, United Socialist Soviet Republic. USSR collapsed and Ukraine declares independence in 1991. If you have thought divorce is difficult, think about separating the two countries. So, dissolution of Soviet Union has brought several controversies. The major issue was Ukraine's denuclearization. Ukraine ended up with large stockpiles of nuclear weapons during the Cold War. When Ukraine gained its independence, it inherited third largest nuclear stockpile in the world. Ukraine had physical control of all the warheads. Operational control belonged to Russia. This was resolved between the two countries in 1996. Ukraine transferred all Soviet-era warheads to Russia. The second major dispute was over the fate of Black Sea Fleet and its operating bases, mainly Sevastopol in Crimean Peninsula. Russia claimed Crimea, making the peninsula an ongoing issue to this date. Third one was related to energy supplies. Several Russian oil and gas pipelines ran through Ukraine. This was resolved when Ukraine gas debit to Russia was paid off by transferring some nuclear weapons that Ukraine inherited from USSR. In 2003, Russia tried to create an Russian-led single economic space with Ukraine. However, Ukraine didn't agree to this plan and continued to seek cooperation with European Union and bid to join NATO. By this time, Ukraine's perception of a Russian relationship differed from region to region. People in eastern and southern regions are pro-Russians, but the people in the central, particularly in the western region, didn't favor the friendly relationship with Russia, as they were mostly Polish people because they were never part of USSR or Soviet Union. The Russians saw Ukraine attempt to join European Union and NATO as pro-Western and anti-Russian. During the Russo-Georgian War in 2008, relationship between Ukraine and Russia soured, as Russia claimed Ukraine was selling arms to Georgia. During the 2009 gas conflict, Russian media portrayed Ukraine as aggressive and greedy state that wanted to ally with Russia's enemies and exploit cheap gas from Russia. In 2010, Ukraine's political landscape changed. Viktor Yanukovych became president. According to many, he was the most pro-Russian president of Ukraine. He rented Sevastopol naval base to Russia in return for some discount gas price. Also abandoned the aspiration to join European Union and NATO membership. In November of 2013, tens of thousands of protesters took to the streets to protest the government's sudden decision to abandon the plan to join European Union, blaming Russia's pressure. In the early 2014, security forces killed 77 protesters. President Yanukovych fled to Russia, and opposition took over the control. By 2014 March, Russian forces annexed Crimea, prompting the biggest East-West showdown since the Cold War. It angered many Western nations. US and European Union imposed harsh sanctions on Russia. By April 2014, Russia threw its weight behind a separatist rebel and broke out Ukraine's eastern region. You may remember this. In 2014, Malaysian airline Flight 17 was shot down by pro-Russian separatists and killed all 283 passengers and 15 crew members. By 2016, Ukraine returned to somewhat fragile peace after 2 years of turmoil. In 2017, Ukraine's association agreement with European Union was signed and finalized. In 2018, Russia opened a bridge between southern Russia to Crimea. Ukraine called this illegal. In 2019, not too long ago, Ukraine and Russia started a peace talk and exchanged prisoners and signed a 5-year deal on Russian gas transit to Europe. However, the peace ended in early 2021 when an ongoing war in Donbass escalated. Russian military started to move toward Ukraine. American President Joe Biden spoke with Russian President Vladimir Putin in 2021 December regarding the buildup of Russian military forces around Ukraine's border in response to Ukraine's intent to join NATO. Putin was very vocal about his displeasure of Western interference, particularly United States of America's interference in Russian business. Biden responded by saying United States will impose economic sanctions more harmful than post-Crimean annexation if Russia was to take military action against Ukraine. Russia is still continuing its military buildup along Ukraine's border, insisting it's only for Russian protection. Ukraine is asking for assistance. More and more NATO allies sending military, humanitarian, and financial support to Ukraine. So the question is, what does Russia want? It is more about what Russia doesn't want. Russia doesn't want Ukraine to join NATO ever. Russia sees NATO's involvement in the region as direct security threat to Russia. Russia also wants NATO to guarantee Ukraine and other Eastern Bloc nations will never join NATO military alliance. The next question is, will Ukraine join NATO? NATO has an open door policy and Ukraine won't join. It is already considered part of the alliance. However, Ukraine wanted to join NATO since 2002 and backed off a few times after Russia threatened to do this or that. This time around, however, 64% of Ukrainians wanted to join NATO, while only 17% opposed the idea, according to the poll by Ukraine Institute of Future. The third question is, will there be an all-out war? This is $1 billion question. I hope not. After what we have been through in the past 2 years with COVID, the last thing the world needs is a war. Don't you agree? But Russia built up about 100,000 troops on the Ukraine borders, but denies it has any plan to invade Ukraine. Would 100,000 forces be enough to completely take over a country? NATO forces have been deploying battalions to Estonia, Lithuania, and Latvia. The Pentagon has put 8,500 US troops on high alert in Eastern Europe, same as some other European nations. Other European nations keep pressing for diplomatic solution and economic sanctions. Most of the NATO members, including United States of America, Germany, and France, are willing to impose sanctions. At this point, every possible sanction is on the table, including the recently completed but not yet operational Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline between Russia and Germany, as well as cutting off Russia from SWIFT. These are severe sanctions. These have huge impact for Russia, but also the other countries. I am recording this on January 27th, 2022. The world is on the limbo. Ball is on Russia's court. I hope I helped you understand the relationship between Russia and Ukraine. They have been fighting each other for a long time. They have been one country, they have been separate countries. It's a mess. I think it's a complicated relationship between Russia and Ukraine, and it's continued to be messy, whether they have a war or not. Let me know what you think. Do you think there's going to be a war, World War III maybe, in 2022? Hope not. Thank you for watching. See you next time.